Good evening and welcome to the Jewish belief in Mashiach. The world that we live in can't continue the way that it is. Never before in our lifetimes have we felt this much so strongly about that truth, that the world simply cannot continue the way that it is right now. We can't continue with these masks. We can't continue with this social distancing. We can't continue with this pandemic. And we're all wondering what's going to be, ma yihiyeh, as we say in Hebrew. And that's how we're excited to present today the first of a 5-week seminar on the Jewish belief in Mashiach. That's what tonight's topic is about. It's a 45-minute session, and I hope that you'll be able to learn, to be challenged, to grow, and to be inspired, hopefully, into the belief in Mashiach. You see, because the belief in Mashiach is something which we can often struggle to relate to. Tonight we're going to focus on how Mashiach will come. In conventional wisdom, when you talk to people about Mashiach, it sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like somehow we're going to, one moment we'll be doing something and a minute later we'll all be somehow in Jerusalem celebrating. It just sounds incredible. It sounds unbelievable. It really sounds too difficult to believe. What we're going to do right now is to explore what the classic Jewish sources actually have to say about the surprisingly multiple possibilities of the arrival of Mashiach. And that's going to be this fascinating discussion that we're about to have right now. You see, in classic Jewish texts, there's the approach which is sudden and miraculous. The approach which is sudden and miraculous, I'm going to share that to my screen. Okay, what we're about to learn right now is the how of Mashiach. How it's going to be that Mashiach is going to come, what's going to happen, what is involved in this process, and that's what we're doing right now. We're going to start off with the classic Jewish texts that are going to share with us not one, but two conflicting approaches to the way that Mashiach is going to join us. The first text is from the prophet Malachi. The prophet who says, "Behold, I send my angel, and he will clear a way before me, and suddenly God, whom you seek, will come to his temple." So the key word here is suddenly. Suddenly God, whom you seek, will come to his temple, and behold, the angel of the covenant, whom you desire, is coming, says God of hosts, which means that this is going to be a very sudden process. Not only is it going to be sudden, but the next text is going to show you, in this text, not from the prophet Malachi, but this text from Maimonides, a letter that Maimonides, a famous letter that he wrote to the Jews of Yemen who are facing forced conversion. In this next text, Maimonides points out that not only will Mashiach's coming be sudden, but it's also going to be supernatural. Let's take a look at this famous letter by Maimonides, 800 years ago. The Messiah will be unknown before his coming, but he will prove by means of miracles and wonders that he is the true Messiah. The mere report of his advent will strike terror into the hearts of the kings of the earth, and their kingdoms will fall, as they will be unable to make war or revolt against him. They will neither defame, deny, nor question him, for the miracles that he will perform will frighten them into complete silence. Isaiah refers to the submission of the kings to the Messiah in the verse, "Kings shall shut their mouths, for he will be unlike anything they ever saw or heard. He will slay whom he will, none will escape or be saved, as it is written, and he shall smite the land with the rod of his mouth." So that is the second text which I'm sharing with you tonight, showing that not only will the Messiah's arrival be sudden, as we saw in the words of the prophet Malachi, but the Messiah's arrival will also be supernatural in the sense that it's going to be filled with miracles. However, before we get too cozy, we discover another set of prophecies which seems to paint a completely different story. And that is a gradual and natural approach. What I'm about to share with you now is a text from the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, which seems to indicate quite the contrary from a sudden and miraculous approach to the arrival of Mashiach, one that is very slow and natural. Here it is on the screen, the text from the Jerusalem Talmud. Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta were walking in the valley of Arabel, and they witnessed the advent of dawn. Rabbi Chia told Rabbi Shimon, so will it be the redemption of the Jewish people. At first it will be a trickle. As it continues, it will gain steam and expand, as it is stated, though I will sit in darkness, God is a light to me. So here we see that it's not going to be sudden, it's going to be a trickle. And another proof that it's not going to be miraculous, surprisingly, comes from Maimonides himself in his Mishnah Torah, in his Magnus Opus, the encyclopedia of the entire Torah. The same Maimonides, by the way, you said moments ago in the letter to the Jews of Yemen, that Mashiach will come with a miraculous process. Here he says quite the opposite. And it's on the screen if you're with me on Zoom at jewishgardens.com/Zoom. One should not presume that the Messianic King must work miracles and wonders, bring about new phenomena in the world, resurrect the dead, or perform other similar deeds. This is not the case. Do not presume that any in the Messianic age, any facet of the world's nature will change, or there will be innovations in the work of creation. Rather, the world will continue according to its pattern. Our sages taught there will be no difference between the current age and the Messianic era except our emancipation from subjugation to the Gentile kingdoms. So basically, the only difference that happens when Mashiach comes is that we will no longer be ruled by Gentile nations. We will experience autonomy. That's it. So which one is it, friends? Sounds a little meshuggah when we find conflicting sources in the Torah, some of which say that it's going to be sudden, others say it's going to be slow, some which say it's going to be miraculous, and others which say that it's going to be natural, especially when it's Maimonides himself who brings us both of those conflicting opinions. And that's why we need to find a critical text in Jewish theology which really helps us understand a far clearer perception on what exactly is going on with the coming of Mashiach. This text really sets us into motion in being able to put us into the right frame of mind, the right perspective. This critical text comes from the Talmud in Sanhedrin, the Babylonian Talmud, which introduces to us a binary approach, which we're going to call the worthy, unworthy binary. That whether Mashiach will come slow or sudden, supernatural or miraculous, is both correct. It all depends on us. Let's take a look at this piece of Talmud, Babylonian Talmud. From Tractate Sanhedrin 98a, the source is at the bottom of the screen. Rabbi Alexandri says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raised the contradiction. The verse says, I, God, in its time will hasten it. Here it reads, in its time, indicating that there is a designated time for the redemption. And it also reads, I will hasten it, indicating that there is no set time for the redemption. The same verse says, in its time, I will hasten it. That's a paradox. It's a conflict. It says, either it's in its time, or I will hasten it. How can it be both? It's like saying, I'm going to get married on my wedding date early. I mean, if you're getting married on your wedding date, then it's not early. If it's early, it's not your wedding date, right? What's going to be? I'm going to pay my bills on time early. It can't be both. That was the question of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Alexandri explains, if they merit, I will hasten the coming of the Mashiach. If they do not merit, Messiah will come in its designated time. Both are true. Mashiach will come in its time and it will be hastened. One of those paradigms is correct, but depending only on our actions, and only time will tell, only our choices will tell. If we choose to be righteous, as we're about to explain, Mashiach will come early. If we're not worthy, then Mashiach will come in its time. Just to bring a supporting text for this idea before we expand on this idea, a supporting text here from Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar, a great scholar of the 1700s. buried in Jerusalem. He was actually buried on the 15th. He passed away on the 15th of Tammuz, day before my birthday. The beautiful story about his graveside, by the way, when the Arabs were trying to uproot, were trying to rewrite history in Jerusalem, and they're trying to remove the Jewish graves on the Mount of Olives, which is the oldest the oldest existing cemetery still in use in the world. You have graves over there thousands of years old. They were trying to bring a bulldozer and to remove the graves. This is in the War of Independence. But what happened was that when the tractor reached the grave of this sage, Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, the tractor overturned. They came from another direction. They tried the same thing. And they came a third time. When the third time the tractor stalled or broke down or overturned, they realized that this was something godly, and they stopped. And if you go to the Mount of Olives today, you'll see there's a clearing amongst the graves right next to the tomb of Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, and he simply prevented them after his death from clearing the graves. Very holy man. It was said about him that if he would have met with the Baal Shem Tov, Mashiach would have come, but the Baal Shem Tov was en route to Israel to meet with him, but something happened and the Baal Shem Tov had to turn around, and alas, Mashiach was unable to come. So let's see what he has to say. The redemption will arrive through the merits of the Jewish people and will be wondrous. The Redeemer will appear miraculously from the heavens. By contrast, if the Jews are unworthy and the redemption comes only because the clock ran out, then it will be different. This is in clear support of what we just said, that Mashiach will come both in its time and hastened, all depending on our actions, if we're worthy or if we're not worthy. That's the worthy-unworthy binary that we spoke about. But now, a closer analysis of this binary will give us a clear understanding of what Mashiach is really all about, so we can put things into the proper perspective. You see, when Mashiach is hastened, when God hastens or allows Mashiach to come early because we are worthy, then what happens is that much of the criteria that are necessary, that have been described as predecessors to the redemption, won't need to take place. If it's going to be sudden, it's going to be sudden without prior world events needing to take place. For example, Elijah the prophet, we've learned about him in our Monday morning class, that Elijah the prophet is supposed to be the harbinger of the redemption. He's supposed to be the one that's announcing to us 3 days before the coming of the Mashiach. So that is only true if Mashiach comes in its time. But if Mashiach comes in a way that is hastened because we're worthy, then Elijah doesn't need to be the harbinger of the redemption, announcing it 3 days prior. Mashiach can just arrive without any prior announcement. And therefore, when we speak about the various criteria that need to take place before the coming of the Mashiach, that applies only if Mashiach were to come in its time when we're unworthy. But if we are worthy, then much of those criteria don't need to take place. Let's take a look at this idea. Oops, sorry. Yeah, let's take a look at this idea. Over here. Okay, sorry, just catching up to the right screen. Here it is. Okay, so this idea right now on the screen goes as follows. When the Talmud and Medrash speak of the many changes that will occur prior to Mashiach's arrival, the context is that such events must occur only prior to the redemption that comes in the designated time. Thus, Moses and all the subsequent sages anticipated a redemption of Achishena, one which was hastened so that everything can be in the best possible manner. We got to be cognizant of the fact that whenever we hear about criteria, it's only things that have to happen before Mashiach. That's only in the process of due process of when Mashiach comes in its time. But if it's because of our worthiness, then a lot of that does not need to take place. But let's understand the logic here. Let's try to understand the logic behind the redemption. You see, what is Mashiach really all about? Mashiach is the purpose for which this world was created. It's not a carrot like a reward given to us at the end of a long day's work. Mashiach is the culmination of all of our accumulated efforts since the beginning of time. You see, when God created Adam and Eve in the very first place, he did it for a reason. We've learned about this. If it's a new idea to you, That's okay. It's a very fundamental idea in Chabad philosophy and in Judaism, and that is because God wanted a home in this spiritually dark world. That's why God created us, because he wanted man, the Jewish people, to serve as a light unto the nations, that we should bring the awareness of God, the consciousness of God, into every facet, into every little corner of the spiritually dark world. Specifically, you may have heard of an idea called the redeeming of the sparks. The redeeming of the sparks. Before this world was created, there was a shattering of godly energy, and there were 288 godly sparks that shattered and were lost, embedded in this physical world. So that when we engage in a mitzvah, though we might be unconscious of the fact that there's a spark embedded within a physical object that we're dealing with, our purpose is to redeem the spark, the godly spark, which is trapped within the physical object. So, for example, if you give money to tzedakah, you buy a palm branch for a lulav, or you eat flour for matzah, by using that physical object for a mitzvah, you are actually redeeming the spark that is trapped or may not be trapped inside of that physical object, so that the accumulation of all the redeemed sparks will have fulfilled the purpose of creation, the redemption, the restoration of all the lost sparks. And when all the lost sparks, all the 288 sparks that were lost in creation will be redeemed and returned back to God, that's when godliness will be able to be revealed throughout this world. Now, something very interesting about this idea, because we will have then created a home for God in this physical world. Now, something very interesting about this idea is that the Jewish people are prohibited from ever going back to Egypt. It's actually a biblical commandment, a biblical prohibition, that we are not allowed to go back to Egypt. Why not? What's the problem with going back to Egypt? The Kabbalah explains that whilst the Jews were in Egypt, they redeemed 202 sparks that were embedded in Egypt. Out of the 288 sparks that were trapped in this world, 202 of them were already redeemed by the Jews in Egypt, and therefore a Jew has nothing to do in Egypt. There is no spiritual service for a Jew to do in Egypt. A Jew's time in Egypt today is a total waste of time, because we cannot redeem any sparks. Why? Because when the Jewish people left Egypt, the Torah tells us that they left it empty. They left the land empty. What that means is they left it not only physically empty of wealth, but they also left it spiritually empty of the spiritual sparks that were embedded within Egypt. And therefore, we have no purpose in going back to Egypt. Which basically means that after the Jews came out of Egypt 3,331 years ago, they left us with just 86 sparks to redeem before the coming of Mashiach. Now, that shouldn't be too difficult if not for the idea that the forces of evil, God's holy angels, are hiding those sparks from us. They conceal the sparks so that we forget to notice the divine purpose of every physical object with which we engage. You know, we can easily get confused. This is the work of Satan. Satan is a holy angel of God whose mission it is to lead us away, to lead us astray from our divine purpose in this world. This is what we call in Tanya language, kalipa. Kalipa means a peel or a shell. When you look at something and you have only a shallow perception of reality, you miss the divine purpose within it. When you eat food only for the taste or for the pleasure of food, and you forget to eat food for the sake of serving God, which is the inner purpose of food, then you've neglected to redeem the spark within the food. So the forces of evil are trying to lead us astray from our mission. Now, the forces of evil are there only to serve as setting the stage for us to fulfill our divine purpose in this world, our divine mission in this world. But those forces of evil, they have a time limit. There's a time limit when they will expire, when the darkness of this world will cease, and we will automatically be drawn to our purpose in this world, which is the divine sparks inside of all the physical objects in this world. Imagine you had X-ray vision and you could see where there was a divine spark embedded in your house. Wouldn't that be lovely? If you knew that there was a certain divine spark in your bedroom or maybe up in your closet, and you could just redeem that spark and fulfill your purpose in this world, it will be lovely. But the forces of darkness, they make us spiritually insensitive and apathetic to being able to perceive any godliness around us. those forces of evil will be expired at a certain time. At that time is when Mashiach comes. So when we speak about Mashiach coming in its time, it's at that time that was predetermined when the forces of evil will simply will simply end, like with a limited lifespan. However, if we Jews are more active in our service of God, if we're diligent in our service of God and we redeem those sparks prematurely, then God doesn't need to wait until the predetermined time for the evil husk of the divine sparks to expire, because we will have brought about the redemption earlier. We will have brought about the redemption. We will have made the world worthy of redemption by the virtue of the fact that we redeemed all the sparks. So in theory, if all the Jews today did teshuvah, and if all the Jews were busy doing mitzvahs and learning Torah, we would have theoretically redeemed all the sparks, and we wouldn't have to wait for Mashiach to come maybe next year or in 5 years from now or tomorrow, because he'd come right now, tonight. That's the meaning of Mashiach coming in his time versus Mashiach coming hastened. It all depends on our worthiness. If we are worthy, which means that we have spiritually cleansed this world and made it already a home for God, fantastic. Mashiach comes early. But if we're not worthy, we haven't finished preparing this world as a home for God, then God has no choice but to bring Mashiach in his own terms when the limits of the lifespan of evil expires, and God can raise the curtains on exile and say, okay guys, I'm moving in, even though we've not finished making for God a home in this world. Let's look at this idea as the Rebbe teaches it in his own words. Here it is. So the Rebbe says like this: there is indeed a paradigm about which the verse states, God sets a date for evil. Creation itself dictates that evil only has a certain time span after which it will expire and disappear without a trace, as the verse states, and I will remove the spirit of evil from the world. However, this paradigm is only reserved for a situation in which the Jewish people have not managed to make such a reality happen with their own transformative work. Then indeed the end of days happens on its own. However, if the Jews are so worthy and transform the world, the redemption will arrive prior to its allotted time. For though the clock will not yet have run out on evil, the Jews will have managed to banish it with their transformative work. This then is the true quality of Achishena, hastening over Be'ita in its time. It transforms even the darkest of evils. We can this hopefully sheds some light on what Mashiach is about. That Mashiach is the culmination of our efforts. We're building a home for God. The era of Mashiach is the era of divine awareness, when God moves into this physical world in a way that is clear, obvious, and apparent. If we bring that about early, that's because we've been diligent in our divine service. If we've not been diligent in our divine service, it means that God is going to have to do that on his own. He's going to move in on his own terms, and that's why it's going to be what we call in its time. Now, what's interesting is that we need actually both approaches in order to be able to sustain a healthy belief in the coming of Mashiach. See, on the one hand, we need to be able to believe that Mashiach is coming now. For thousands of years, Jews have always declared, I believe in perfect faith in his coming. In the coming of the Mashiach, I know he may tarry. I await his coming every day. Even on the way to the gas chambers, the Jews sang these words, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema b'viat Mashiach. How is it possible to believe that Mashiach is coming today? That's only possible through the paradigm of hastening. That maybe we will be worthy, and hopefully we will tip the scale for good and bring Mashiach today, right now. So the only way that we can believe the Mashiach is coming right now is if we believe that we'll be worthy and cause a sudden and a miraculous upcoming to the Mashiach. But at the same time, a lot of us have a hard time believing in the world changing in an instant. A lot of us will say, well, Rabbi, I have a very hard time. I don't really believe that Mashiach can come in a second and that the world is going to change with just the flick of a finger. A lot of us would have said that, especially before coronavirus. Can you imagine if somebody would have told you in February? Imagine if somebody told you in February this year that in 2 weeks from now, the world will be unrecognizable. Shopping malls will be going out of business. Airlines will be going out of business. Nobody will be going to hotels. Nobody will be walking out of their homes. Schools will be shutting down. You look at the guy and say, you're crazy, right? This is this year in February. And that's exactly what happened. It was one fine day. I think it was a few days after Purim. It was mid-March, March 14th maybe, this year, something around that time, when suddenly the whole world, the way we know it, shut down. It feels like a lifetime ago. It was literally in the blink of an eye. So we actually are pretty good witnesses of the way the world can change in an instant. But even if you still choose to say that you have a hard time believing that Mashiach can come and the world can change in an instant, that's why we need the second paradigm, the paradigm that Mashiach will come slowly, in a slow and gradual process in its time, to be able to make it more credible and more able for us to believe in. Let's take a look at how the Rebbe says this idea here on the screen. Are you able to see what's on the screen? My friends on Zoom, can you see what's on the screen? Is it clear? Are you able to read it? Yeah? Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Good. So let's take a look in the Rebbe's words. We now have an answer to all the chatter about our recent hype, about Mashiach's imminent arrival. After all, how will such hype be received at home? What will Main Street think about such talk? The answer is, if the elements of redemption were completely foreign, it would indeed be a tough sell. However, because they are not foreign at all, and in fact, much of it is already underway in our very material present-day reality, an imminent redemption will not be a surprise at all. What the Rebbe is pointing out to us is that in addition to the belief that Mashiach can come at any moment because we'll tip the scale for the good, and in the blink of an eye, Mashiach will come in a sudden and miraculous process. In addition to that, the arrival of Mashiach in a slow and gradual manner is already unfolding. It has already begun in front of our eyes. How is that? What's happening? How is it possible that Mashiach is already in process, the events leading up to the coming of the Mashiach, that the world is changing in a way that is preparing the world for the coming of the Mashiach? Well, that is not only on a global scale, but also on a scale which is internal to the Jewish people. I'd like to share with you five world events that have changed, that are evolving and quickly evolving towards the arrival of the coming of Mashiach in a way that can help us understand that not only is it a slow process, but not only is it going to be a miraculous process, but in addition, it's also a slow process and a gradual process, which is already in motion. So let's talk about the first two, which are internal to the Jewish people, two signs of how the world is changing in preparation for the coming of the Mashiach. And these ones are unique to the Jewish people. The first one we know is that Mashiach's principal purpose is for the world to be conscious of God. That the whole world will be filled with the knowledge of God. We know the famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, when he had an elevation of the soul, when he met the Mashiach, the soul of Mashiach. The Baal Shem Tov asked Mashiach, when is the Master coming? And his response was, when your well springs will spread forth outward. When the teachings of Hasidus, of divine mysticism, of Jewish mysticism, will be spread outward, which means everywhere, when the whole world will be talking about godliness, about the teachings of Jewish mysticism. And indeed, we see that 250 years ago, when the Baal Shem Tov had that experience with the Mashiach, there was maybe a few Jewish scholars that were aware of the ideas of godliness and the teachings of Jewish mysticism. But today, this is something that we're doing on Zoom, for heaven's sake, and it's live broadcast right now on Facebook. It's going to be turned into a video on YouTube soon, and it's going to be shared with many of our friends and members and beyond who watch our videos after they take place live. So there's people, somebody called me today that says that they can't leave the house, but they are able to stream the videos onto their TV at home, and they can watch the rabbi on, talking about godliness and Jewish mysticism on their TV screen. And the good thing is, if you don't like what the rabbi is saying, you can turn him off, right? It's great. So what's happening now is like in an unprecedented manner, like never happened in the history of the world. Divine consciousness, the teachings of Jewish mysticism, the teachings of Hasidus are freely available all around the world. And this all began 500 years ago in the Arizal, the saintly Arizal. Many of us have visited his grave and his mikveh in the north of Israel in Tzfat. When the Arizal announced that from now on it is a mitzvah to reveal the secret wisdom of the Kabbalah, until the age of the Arizal 500 years ago, Jewish mysticism was the heavily guarded secret. But from that moment on, he felt that the world was preparing for Mashiach, preparing for divine wisdom and divine awareness, and therefore the teachings of divine consciousness need to be taught to the entire world. So that is something which clearly is happening all around us, where you hear about random people that you wouldn't even expect to be talking about ideas that are godly. I remember I was once in the Palm Beach Gardens library, and I met a Rastafarian. A Rastafarian is basically like a young disciple of Bob Marley, with the dreadlocks and everything else, and he was singing words of Tanya. I couldn't believe it. He was singing words of Tanya about Or Ein Sof, about the unlimited, the infinite light of God. And I couldn't believe it. He was singing in Hebrew. I looked at him and I was like, he looks at me and I'm like, did you say what I think you said? And he tells me, yeah, you've heard of Matisyahu. Matisyahu was at that time a very famous Hasidic. He was actually a Chabadnik, a Hasidic reggae singer. And he was singing all sorts of lyrics from Tanya and Hasidus, and it was penetrating all these incredible circles that nobody would have ever thought would be able to penetrate, teaching them divine consciousness and words of Tanya. It was extraordinary to hear how he was able to do that, to the point that in the Palm Beach Gardens library, I met a Gentile who was singing words of Tanya. It was unbelievable. Clearly, we're steamrolling towards Mashiach. Another idea is that for thousands of years since the destruction of the temple, Jews would shy away from joy. Do you know that in the Code of Jewish Law, it says you're not supposed to listen to music ever? In the Code of Jewish Law, I'm going to say that again. It says you're not allowed to listen to music ever. Since the destruction of our temple, because it's like disrespectful to the destruction of our temple. Can you imagine? Yet today we know we listen to music all the time. Because it was the Baal Shem Tov again, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who introduced a revolution to Judaism, which up to that point was very serious and somber. The Hasidim were the happy Jews. They were the ones that were always joyous, always celebratory, because they were conscious of their close relationship with God through the study of divine wisdom and the awareness of godliness being everywhere and the purpose of their mitzvahs and the purposefulness of our lives. Hasidim are naturally joyous. And it is this joy which is a precursor to the ultimate joy, the joy of the redemption. So these are two ideas of how the world is moving closer, how the Jewish world is moving closer to redemption on a natural and gradual scale. But let's talk about three more ideas of how at least two more ideas of how the world at large is racing towards redemption. We know about democracy, global peace, and religious liberty. While the world is working consciously towards democracy, yes, there are some pockets of rebellion. There are some pockets of horrible wars that are going on. But the world as a whole is making war very unpopular. It's very uncool today to attack anybody else. Remember when Russia invaded Crimea? They were practically ostracized by the world powers for that. I'm not sure what happened subsequent to that, but at least for a period of time, they were almost excommunicated from the world's community, because you don't do that anymore. It's not appropriate to conquer anybody else. This is not what we're supposed to do. It's about rights, civil liberties, and about democracies. You know, even the United Nations, as dysfunctional a union as it is, at least in their charter, they call for the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy of Isaiah, which is to beat swords into plowshares. Let's take a look at this idea as taught in the words of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, in these times, the heads of state the world over have decided to reduce their weapons capacity and invest in economic peaceful measures. This is, after all, what the prophet promises, that they will beat their swords into plowshares, dismantling weapons and fashioning them into tools to work the ground to produce bread. You know, countries now are changing or redirecting military budgets into education and food programs. We have a clear sign that the signs of the ultimate redemption are beginning to blossom. Many great and mighty countries have reformed and established noble governments grounded in just and fair laws. This too is a foretaste of the overall reform and promise and peace that Mashiach will bring to the world. Another realization of this promise of the world's attitude to the Jewish people as we have been granted religious freedom. And I want you to think about that for a moment. I know we spoke about this idea last week, so I'm going to be brief here. But this idea that today, pretty much 100% of all Jewish people alive today live in countries that allow them to live freely as Jews. Even our friends in Arab countries like Turkey or Azerbaijan have Chabads that are under government protection. The Chabad of Turkey, the Chabad of Azerbaijan, Iran, we don't have any Jews living in there, admittedly. But wherever Jews live today, they are at least free to exercise religious freedom. And that's an extraordinary achievement, which really wasn't present in our lives as Jewish people for the past 1900 years before that. So there's clearly a sign of the imminent redemption, which is a time of world peace. And finally, one final proof I want to share with you is another indicator of the imminent redemption is the historic return of Jews to Israel. Now, this one you really can't argue with. It says that when Mashiach comes, the Jews will return to Israel on the wings of eagles. So what exactly does it mean, the wings of eagles? So some will tell you wings of eagles on a literal sense. It sounds like a fantasy. I would tell you wings of eagles means Boeing 787 Dreamliners, right? These airplanes, they're all empty. They're sitting in these airports. They're grounded, airports in France and around the world. What are these airplanes doing? They're waiting to bring us to Israel on the wings of eagles. When Isaiah the prophet was describing JetBlue to us, he couldn't really say JetBlue or El Al. He had to say the wings of eagles. He was like, I don't know how to describe this thing to you, but it looks like an eagle. And they're sitting on its wings, right? So this is certainly happening in our times, when today, for the very first time in 2,000 years, the majority of the world's population lives in Israel, more than it does in the United States. There are more Jews today in Israel than there are in the United States. Israel is the world's leader in terms of Jewish population, as you have aliyahs from every corner of the world, from Ethiopia. At the beginning of this, of Corona, there was a special El Al flight that I think went to Peru, or was it some other, New Zealand maybe? There was Israelis that was stranded somewhere in a place where El Al doesn't fly, and El Al went out to get them because the Israeli government leaves no man behind. It was a beautiful, very heartwarming experience to see. And the fact that the Russian Jews were able to go out of Russia from all that religious persecution to come to a life of freedom in Israel is certainly a precursor to the redemption. Clearly, friends, we see that we are along the way with much momentum already built up. We already have a lot of momentum built up for the for the coming of the Mashiach in its time, as a slow and gradual process, in addition to the fact that Mashiach can indeed come at any moment, the moment you or I do one more mitzvah to tip that scale for the good, tipping the scale for ourselves and for the entire world to bring Mashiach. Now, I'd like to conclude with a very powerful idea here. A powerful idea in Jewish law, in halacha. The law says like this, that a kohen, a priest, is not allowed to drink wine today. He's not allowed to drink wine to the point of drunkenness. He's not allowed to drink a revis, which is a biblical measurement, a little less than 4 ounces. Why is it that a kohen today cannot drink? Why is it that what was that? Why is it that a kohen today cannot get drunk? He's not allowed to drink a little less than 4 ounces of wine. The reason is because Mashiach can come at any moment. And were Mashiach to come at any moment, what would happen is that this Kohen needs to be ready to serve God in the temple. And he wouldn't be ready because when you're drunk, you're not allowed to serve God in the temple. How long, this is an analysis that the Rebbe makes, how long does it take for a person to become undrunk? Any ideas? Does anybody know here how long it takes a person to become sober after you were drunk? Any suggestions? Maybe Mark, anybody else over there? Any suggestions as to what it might take for a person to reach a state of sobriety?
Maybe 1
6
day.
hours.
6 hours. Okay, I'm not sure who said that. Was that Stephanie said 1 day?
Perhaps.
Okay, so we have 2 suggestions over here, 6 hours and 1 day. I'm not sure what you guys have been drinking, but that's a long time to get sober.
Well,
according to Jewish law. Stephanie, you always have a glass of wine and you're
I'm a
right?
lightweight, but I'm a lightweight. So
That's
if I
true
were drunk, it would
That's
take
true.
me a long time.
Okay, so according to Jewish law, there's 2 ways to become undrunk. Okay, let's take a look. What are the two ways to become undrunk? They are as follows. Can we find them? One way is, where is it? My notes over here. Okay, whatever. I can't find it right now, but I'll tell it to you. One way is the amount of time that it takes you to walk a mile. A mile is like a mile. The amount of time it takes you to walk a mile, basically. So how long does it take you to walk a mile? According to some opinions, 18 minutes. According to the most longest opinions, it's 24 minutes. According to Jewish law, the longest time it takes for a person to become sober from drinking a revis, which is 4 ounces. I'm not talking about 4 cups. I'm not talking about 4 bottles, okay, which people have been known to do. I'm talking about just, 4 ounces. It takes a maximum of 24 minutes to become sober. Now, what's the problem with a priest, a Kohen, drinking wine today? No. Is it going to take 24 minutes before he's summoned to the temple to serve in the temple, and he's going to be drunk and he won't be available? The answer is yes. Mashiach can come that quickly. So if you look at the watch right now, it's 8:50 p.m., which means by 9:14 p.m., by 9:14 p.m., 9:50 now p.m., Mashiach can have already arrived. The temple will have been rebuilt, and they will have already, you've seen an alert on your cell phone that says, we know you're a Kohen, Dr. Collins. We need you now to serve in the temple. And then Elaine is like, I'm sorry, but he just had a drink. Can you imagine we're waiting 2,000 years and this guy's drunk? It's not possible. That's the reason why Jewish law says that the Kohen is never allowed to drink wine, because he has to always be ready for the coming of Mashiach within 24 minutes. That's how soon it can be that Mashiach will come. Now, friends, I want to conclude with one more thought. One final thought here to conclude with, okay? And that final thought is like this, is that we've learned tonight that Mashiach can come in one of 2 ways, both of which are true. It can either be if we're worthy, it would be sudden and miraculous. If we're unworthy, it will be in its time, slow and gradual and non-miraculous. A natural process. Both of those are already taking place, in the sense that we've already experienced the natural process where we see many things that are leading the world towards redemption, towards the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. And at the same time, we still say that at this moment, Mashiach can still come. But what about teshuvah? What about the fact that the Jewish people still need to do teshuvah before Mashiach comes? Teshuvah is repentance. Have you ever heard of this idea that the entire Jewish people have to repent, have to return to God before Mashiach comes? I mean, how long does it take for the entire Jewish nation to do teshuvah? Look around. Do you have friends that you think about them? No way that guy is doing teshuvah. She is not going to be caught dead in a synagogue. Not in the next 2,400 years, never mind 24 minutes, right? We all have friends like that, right? So how is it possible that Mashiach can come if the Jewish people at least, are not ready with teshuvah? We haven't repented yet. What's going on? So I'd like to give you 6 answers to this question. First of all, the first answer comes from the Munkacher Rebbe, the Rebbe of Munkach. It's a dynasty like Chabad, like Vizhnitz. It's a Munkacher dynasty. My brother lives near them in Petach Tikva in Israel. So the Rebbe of Munkach says that anybody who says that the Jewish people have to do teshuvah before Mashiach comes is simply wrong. He says it's patently false and ridiculous. It's not true. We don't have to do teshuvah. That solves that question, right? Done. I'm going to give you 6 answers to this question, right? That's number 2. Rapid fire here. Another one is that we will do teshuvah, but either it's going to be by our free choice, or it's going to be forced upon us. You know how the synagogues all fill up whenever there's a war in Israel. Whenever there's a war in Israel, suddenly we're all coming out to pray. Days of solidarity when there's an attack on Poway, Chabad, or a synagogue in Pittsburgh, we're all running together to pray. When we Jews in America hear about anti-Semitism, there's nothing that fills up the shuls like anti-Semitism. When you get some Ilhan Omar or something, so I don't know, some jihadist who becomes president of the United States or something, that's going to inspire everybody to teshuvah very, very quickly. So whether that teshuvah is internal or our repentance is inspired by some anti-Semite or some war that's presented upon us, God forbid, we will do teshuvah. That's the second answer. By the way, that was not a political statement in any respect, shape, form, or fashion. Don't think I was not referring to anything about the 2020 elections. at all. So that was a very powerful disclaimer. There was just a mere metaphor if there was a terrible anti-Semite in the White House, but without any reference to any characters that you may or may not be aware of. Okay, good. So again, it's not a political statement. Third answer is that what does it mean to do teshuvah? Does it mean we'll all become religious? Or does it mean they'll have a turn of heart? Like we'll have like an inspiration towards religion. And that, by the way, we are seeing. There is a teshuvah revolution in the world today where Chabad houses are growing everywhere. 40 years ago, if you wanted to lay tefillin with 30 Jews, you had to ask 150 Jews to get 30 people to agree to lay tefillin. Today, anyone I really ask to lay tefillin, like, yeah, Rabbi, no problem. It's really not a big deal to lay tefillin. Have a mezuzah, to come to a Shabbos table. People are certainly moving in the direction of where they're embracing Chabad houses, embracing their rabbis. Everybody's got a rabbi and speed dial today. It's great. It's beautiful. By the way, there's, what does it take to do teshuvah? If a man, is a law in the Talmud that says if a man betroths a woman and he says to her, I'm marrying you now, I'm engaging you right now on condition that I am a perfect tzaddik. What do you think the law is? I'm engaging you, betrothing you right now on condition that I am already a perfect tzaddik. What do we say? Do we say no chance? The Talmud rules she needs a get. She's legally married. Why? Because to do teshuvah takes a mere instant. It simply is a change of heart. You can have done teshuvah within the next 12 seconds. That's it. And you will be a righteous person by merely saying, I regret the past and I wish for the future to be different. That's it. You are now perfectly righteous. Teshuvah has been done and you're good to go. So teshuvah takes merely an instant. And that's the fourth answer of how the Jewish people are going to do teshuvah before the coming of Mashiach. Another fifth answer is that there'll be a massive global wave of teshuvah. Like after the 6-Day War, I don't remember this, I wasn't born yet, but maybe you remember that after the 6-Day War, there was this surge of inspiration throughout the Jewish world, where people were like so inspired by the miracle. They were so sure that Israel was going to be driven into the sea, and suddenly Israel like tripled in size and conquered these biblical homelands of ours in Jerusalem, in the north, in the south, everywhere, in what's falsely called the West Bank, but in Judea and Samaria. It's amazing that it was such a surge of inspiration. You see those pictures of the soldiers at the Western Wall, even secular soldiers. They laid tefillin at the Western Wall and they cried tears of the ages because they experienced a global movement of the Jewish people towards teshuvah. And that's the kind of idea which would happen just before the coming of Mashiach. I think that with the election going on, depending which side of the aisle you stand on, there's certainly waves where people feel like it's the end of the world upon us, or it's different waves that you see humanity is moving in waves of either the best or the worst. And before the coming of Mashiach, we'll experience such a thing where, according to this fifth answer, the teshuvah will be one. There will be like a global wave that will spread throughout the Jewish people. And the final answer I want to share with you is that those that did not do teshuvah, it's not their fault. There's a law in the Talmud that if a kid is kidnapped, a Jewish kid is kidnapped. Imagine a Jewish kid is kidnapped at 1 day old from the hospital, and he's raised as a Gentile. Can he ever be held accountable for not having kept Shabbos? Can he ever be held accountable for never having laid tefillin or lit Shabbos candles? For sure not. I mean, the kid is kidnapped as a baby, right? It's called a tinok shenishba leven akum, a child that was taken hostage amongst the Gentiles. And we, said the Rebbe, are all spiritual hostages. You see, when our parents or grandparents came to America, they meant well. They were Shabbat observant and they were laying tefillin. But when they came here, they were beaten and bruised by the Holocaust or the pogroms of Russia, or who knows what other suffering they experienced. And they came to America and they genuinely wanted to survive. And maybe they had to work in Shabbos. It wasn't really their fault, but it certainly is not our fault. We who were raised without a Jewish education, without a Hebrew school, we who only today, at this advanced age of our lives and stage of our lives, are only learning about the ideas of Mashiach and the basics of Judaism. Where were we until now? We didn't know. So what about the rest of our friends? They simply don't know. They've not yet been enlightened. They were raised without a proper Jewish education. And therefore, friends, it is simply not their fault. This concludes our lesson tonight, and I'd love to hear your feedback, your questions or comments. Next week, by the way, we'll be talking about the war of Gog and Magog. You may have heard of this. It's a legendary war that's supposed to take place before the coming of Mashiach. We'll be talking about that next week. But I want to thank everybody for joining me here tonight. It's been a real pleasure studying with you, and looking forward to continuing this next Thursday night, same time, same place. And please always send me your emails. We'd love to hear from you at rabbi@jewishgardens.com is my email. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your reflections. And with that, I want to wish everybody a good night.